So hello everyone, my name's Graham Hopkins. I'm your host of the Be Empowered Show. The Be Empowered Show is a conversation about what it's like to feel empowered and what it's like to feel connected as opposed to feeling separate from. And today we have a very special guest. I've known Phil Bertram for probably 20 to 25 years now. The Bertrams have been family friends. We've watched Phil's progress as he's grown up since a young child, actually. And basically we want to kind of brace the topic of working effortlessly versus being effortful. So, Phil Bertram, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much.
Phil, when we were family friends years ago, we had 4 small children, and you put your hand up to come and teach them music. So all 4 of them actually learnt the piano, probably starting from the age of 5 or somewhere around there, and you were their teacher. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was actually a lot of fun. Look, I started pretty young, which is in a lot of ways a really good time to start teaching because you don't really overthink it. You just engage with them, enjoy the process, enjoy the passion of music, enjoy the actual process of just making sounds. It doesn't have to be too technical. But I also had a very technical piano teacher, so technique was a big part of the teaching, but I didn't really come at it from a really formal approach. I loved it. They were all fantastic fun to teach, and I look back on some really fond memories from that.
So, Phil, all 4 children have gone on to be musical geniuses in their own right. Today, I just looked at Andy. Andy's our second son. He comes under the name of Andiers for his stage name, and he's got 90,000 hits for one song in 7 days, which is pretty amazing. So I guess we could say that you had a lot to do with that kind of progress that all 4 children have made.
Oh, look, I can't take a lot of credit there. I guess when I talked to him about that, and he actually said a while ago, he actually mentioned something along those lines. I found that incredibly humbling. They've gone a long way further than I ever went. And I guess the key really was just engaging with them as an impressionable young person and enjoying that process with them. And they've taken it far further than I ever did, and I'm absolutely stoked for them. All of them, really. They're a very, very talented bunch. So credit to yourself as well, mate. Take a bit of credit.
Thanks, Phil. I guess what I'm saying there is that they all look up to you as a kind of a mentor. So that's how powerful, even when we don't know that we're actually impacting people, we really are. So well done, Phil Bertram.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Graham.
So Phil, moving on from there, let's just do a little bit of an overview, because where I want to go with this conversation is the fact that you ended up, I think it would have been about 1 year ago, doing a coaching course with a chap called George Hallou from Perth, Australia, and you did his program called the EP7, which stands for Empowered for Purpose in 7 Steps. And this has taken you from this effortful to effortless journey that, or it's even a new paradigm that you've actually been launched into. But before we get there, Phil, can you just give us a bit of an overview about what steps you took in the business world, because this is related to your business, the struggles you went through, and then eventually we talk about how all that changed. So just give us a bit of an overview, Phil, going forward.
Not a worry at all. While I was teaching the piano a little later on, so early 20s, I went into sales, in the sales environment, which has been one of the best things that's happened to me, but also one of the most damaging things that happened to me. Now, to give you a bit of context behind that, it was a frontline sales role from early 20s. I've pretty much stayed in a frontline sales role for the entire time. What you get taught when you're in sales is that it's about self-discipline. It's about making sure your mind's in the right place. It's about making sure that you push yourself as much as you can in order to get the result. You also learn some really good things, like anything that happens is completely you, as in you can't blame anything on other people. And you've got to take, obviously, responsibility for everything that's happening in your world. What they don't teach you is that living in your head and only thinking and rationalizing your way through everything doesn't actually bring you joy. And you can't get success just by effort. Now, it's clear now, since I've gone through that process, and there was really 3 companies involved in there, and I've moved my way up through the ranks and obtained a lot of experience. So my head's full of understanding of how it all's supposed to work. What I was missing, though, is, I guess, the wisdom that comes from understanding what your heart or the actual essence of you really wants to do. Now, the previous job to where I'm actually at the moment, I really went into business with the wrong guy. So looking at that without giving too much detail, the business model was sound. What we did was sound. I enjoyed the process of it, but I didn't have the boundaries that came with understanding what I actually wanted to do and the normal checks and balances you actually get around that. So I kind of hit a process where I actually remember the turning point very clearly. I was talking to my sister and I said, look, I think I'm coming at this from the wrong way. I'm used to just flogging myself mercilessly to try to get the result. But there's got to be a way to make me as a person fitter within that space. And I don't know what it is, but that's what I want to go and look for. So it wasn't any of these self-help books that I've been used to. There was something else. And looking in the rearview mirror now, that was my heart literally screaming at me going, dude, you've got to change direction because the direction you're going now will run you into the ground. And I knew it deep down, but I didn't want to admit it.
Yeah, I might just add here, Phil, that this interview came about through a lunch that we had, probably going back about 4 months ago now, where we were catching up because we've known each other for a long, long time. And I remember sitting there at lunch talking about your transition into this more effortless type of business model that you've got now. And you had just previously done this coaching course in Subiaco, Perth, with George, and you kept sitting back and saying, I can't believe it, you two guys are reading each other's mail.
Yeah.
So that ended up in me contacting George, and I've done an interview with George, which was fantastic. This interview will be played after George's interview. So George is the coach and you're the client, if you like. And,
absolutely.
And people will be able to see how his coaching model has transformed your life. Because Phil, I'm looking for people who actually have this model where they are moving outside the paradigm of trying to gain in order to get, but coming to the realization that you already are. So, can you tell us a little bit about how that occurred? What brought it on for a start? What took you to that point where you had to go and see a coach?
There were 2 avenues. I guess to start with the first one, my previous experience, the business that I went into, it kind of poisoned the way I felt about the industry that I was in. I had a really bad experience in that. Look, did well in the end at getting out of that and doing what we're doing, and the business is still running. But it took so much joy out of that industry that I previously saw as something that I loved, and I couldn't get my head around that because it had been all my professional career in that industry, and to not all of a sudden have any enjoyment, in fact, being repelled from where you've actually spent your entire career, was a little bit scary. For me, that's when I really started questioning everything. And as a part of questioning, it was not only the industry, but it was the way I was actually interacting, the way I'd done life, and all of those sorts of things. And after that conversation with Michelle, I went on a big hunt online. And I looked at a number of different options of what that is. And you look at, obviously, the stereotypical ways of sorting that out. But I remember saying also to my sister, it's like I need to find a coach. It's like I need someone to help me to find out what I've taken on that I don't really believe, and what it is that I just need a bit of a swift kick up the butt in order to understand. This was my terminology of the day. And I found him as Mind Power coach in Perth. And really his first process was sitting down for an hour and finding out what it is that he does. It was a complimentary session. I didn't give anything away at all. Like, I literally sat there and said, well, you just tell me what you're going to do and I'm just going to listen, which might have been a little bit awkward for him, but I didn't want him to just tell me what I wanted to hear. So I really needed him to say what he was going to say and then figure out whether that's what I was looking for. And it was exactly what I was looking for. And what that was all about was not understanding that you can continually punish yourself for a lack of results. It's not about rationalizing your way through everything that's going on. It's understanding that there's the heart, which is a part of your world, a part of my world, a part of me that I was really, really good at suppressing, really good at ignoring. I used it as a bit of a warning bell, if you like, but I never really understood how to listen to the language of the heart, and I never really knew how to incorporate that into my world. And exactly as you've said, he didn't need to teach me anything. He needed me to understand how to get past this thing and allow the heart to talk. And I'm not saying that to belittle the program at all. There's a lot of meat in there. There's a lot of stuff that helps you to go through that process. But the key in all of that is he's not turning it on. He's helping you to recognize that it was already there and understanding how to listen to it and how to actually, I guess, quiet the mind enough to actually hear that and understand it. And every single one of those steps going through them was just like a light bulb went on all the way through. It was incredible. And it really turned it around in a much smaller space of time than I thought it would. And it's changed the way I approach the world at the moment.
Excellent. So I just want to clarify, Phil, that in my interview with George, it just came off the top of my head. I called you in your former life a brash young man. And my wife, Susanna, said, hey, Graham, that's too harsh, you know. And yesterday, I went and I looked up the word brash, what it actually means. And one of the meanings means exerting a lot of energy and getting nowhere. It's like a duck sitting on the water, you know. Underneath the water, the legs are going hell for leather, if you like. Yep. And everything might seem like peaceful on the top, but, you know, that's how we tend to live our lives, Phil. I wasn't trying to be derogatory in saying that. But I think you can see now that in hindsight that that's probably how it was, and that's probably what led you to the experiences you had financially with your partner that taught you all the lessons that you know now that is now propelling you forward at a great rate.
Absolutely, Graham. That's fair. I admit when I first read that on the introduction to it, I'm like, well, that's an interesting word. I did the same thing. I actually looked up the definition, and yeah, it's actually exactly right. Even if you get material success, but you're expending massive amounts of energy, you don't enjoy it because you're getting a status and you're getting a reputation, but it's not your heart. It's not you. You're not engaged in that. It's not something that actually makes you feel like you're getting any satisfaction from it. And so you're dead right. In all that period of time, I didn't get anywhere. What I did get, though, was an understanding of a system that doesn't work. And I'm allergic to that system now. I can't slip back into that. I've learned that lesson 1,000 times over, and that's not going to change back into that space again. So for me, I had to have that moment, you know, where this doesn't work. This process that I'm going through doesn't work. There has to be another way. And until I actually had that moment where I ran out, I just didn't have any more energy to keep being, as you say, the brash person to get the success. Then all of a sudden they take that away from you. What have you got left?
Exactly. So my kind of definition of effortful is one in exerting a lot of energy in order to have a short-term gain. But effortless, it doesn't mean not working it. You've still got to put in the work, but it's coming from a different attitude, from a different paradigm, and that brings a long-term transformation. So how do you think this kind of fitted into your world after you did the coaching course with George?
It's a really good question. The actual act of going to work doesn't really change. The actual act of, I guess, motivating yourself to do the right thing for people and making sure that you've actually got the service at the heart of what you're doing, that doesn't change. But the way you approach that work internally, the way you approach it by way of motivation, um, the easiest way to explain it is going to sound a little bit off, but it actually feels like you're not having to actually whip yourself into the process as much because you're being driven from an internal compass, knowing that's where you want to be. And then you get reinforced by all these little things that happen that just remind you and show you that you're in the right place. To catch that thought for a second, I mean, my way of looking at the world before used to be, this is where I'm going to. So I always had a goal system and what I wanted to do. And then my job was to survey the landscape, figure out what it is that needed to go my way, and then try to dominate it. So there might be 7 or 8 different games going on at the same time, so to speak. My job was to control the outcome of every one of those games. That's exhausting. And it doesn't work. You can control it for a while, but even if you get what you want, you didn't really get what you wanted because you're really not actually, you've got nothing left to actually enjoy that process. I guess the best way of explaining going to effortless is understanding that if your heart's telling you where to go, then those 7 or 8 things are going to play along the same line anyway, because you're going to attract it to yourself through an innate energy rather than having to dominate it, control it, manipulate it, all the bad words you want to chuck in there. That's fun because those 7 or 8 things start actually talking with you on your level and doing what you expect that they're going to do on this path. And if they don't, there's a trigger point to go, well, what have I possibly missed here? Is there a little bit of a change of direction that's happening? So that's not really meant as I'm giving up control over my destiny. That's just, for me, the change has been, I know when I'm on the right track because my heart is actually resounding with that, feeling and showing me and actually communicating with me that it feels right. And by doing that, you get supported by so much evidence around you that things are going the way that they're going to do. And in the business opportunity that I've got now, I haven't had to do anything like what I had to do previously. And frankly, it's a far better opportunity than what it is that I actually had previously. And it's being in that space, allowing it to happen, being authentic and being passionate about what I do. And as soon as I've been in that space, it just is slipping into place. And it's as surprising for me as anyone, as a guy who's lived the opposite side of the spectrum all my life. And it means you can come at it from an attitude of gratitude as well. And I'm very humbled to be in the position that I'm in. And it's a pretty amazing journey to be walking from the heart rather than the head.
Phil, I see you've got your electronic piano behind you, which is familiar to me because it sat in our house for years with Joshua. But the point I want to make is this new flow that you've entered into in the workplace. How can you tie that together with the flow that you get into when you're playing music? Do you see any correlation there?
A massive amount. Actually, interesting is part of the EP7. George said to me in the beginning of it, well, you basically do a personal assessment and you work out what's working in your space when you're doing that particular activity and what's not. Now, he did mine on the piano as soon as he found out I was a musician, and I actually admitted to him I hadn't played it for 10 years. Exactly like you say, mate, partly because your son stole my piano off me, but that's another point. But the process of actually getting into piano again was actually pretty scary to start, because when I first started playing it again, A, the technique wasn't there, but B, the flow, as you mentioned, is a good word for it, wasn't there either. And actually, your kids were some of the biggest proponents of encouragement there, saying you really need to get back into it. Just discipline yourself. Forget what it sounds like. Be kind to yourself. These are Josh Hopkins' words speaking. And I did. I persisted with it. As soon as I could actually quiet that enough, the flow was coming back. But interestingly, that's the same journey that I went on personally and professionally. Is I had to actually quiet the brain. All of the things that you learned about what you can and what you can't and what you should and what you shouldn't, and actually listen to your heart. So there's a huge parallel between the two of them. And the more I've actually spent time in that, the easier that transition was personally as well. Because what you kind of realize is when you were young and you were playing in that space, you were already doing that. I was already doing that in the flow, in the heart. All I did was I learned a whole lot of skill sets, which I thought were skills, though they weren't necessarily skills to help me do life properly. And that inhibited all of that. The moment I started getting back into it, I'm stripping those layers away again and reminding myself that I was already doing that when I was a kid on the piano. That's been
Yeah,
a really beautiful journey for me.
it's amazing that all these things came naturally to you back when you were teaching our children music, and there was like a gap that formed that you needed to re-bridge, wasn't there? That to bring you back to that point of your childhood where you could actually enter that flow again. That's really interesting, Phil.
It is. It's kind of amazing what we do to ourselves, all in the matter of growing up. There's avenues that you can grow up in for sure. There's avenues you can. It really doesn't help you to grow up in that particular way. And the head knowledge for me was just reading a hell of a lot of self-help books as a part of the sales training and going to a lot of sales training things. Yeah, that gives you a lot of processes that you can use to engage and you can use to sell, so to speak. But what it doesn't do for you is allow you to be in the flow. And I didn't realize that until my process fell apart. And the piano's been a really good bridge to get me back to that, actually. It's been beautiful.
Excellent. So, Phil, in hindsight, what is a little key that you found in George's EP7 course that really brought you back into the flow for your business, so that you could go back into the workforce and really start to blow it out of the water?
Um, my first priority when I spoke to George wasn't business, believe it or not. My first thought was me, because I
Yeah.
knew I'd gone missing. I was MIA. At least the guy that I knew was in there that was buried under layers of rubbish. Um, for me, that first one, where you do that personal assessment, realize that you actually are, but all these layers you put on top to define yourself, they're all completely interchangeable. Without effort, you don't need to brainwash yourself year after year to try to unbelieve it. You can literally take yourself out of that space, realize and recognize what you put in front of you, change it all, and then reinsert yourself back into that process. That was a Yahtzee moment for me, where I went, okay, so I've literally trapped myself in a cage that I've completely made out of my own mind, and I can change myself at any point out of my own mind. That's cool, because that lined up with my way of thinking and believing about the world, but all of a sudden it was usable. And we went through the process then of understanding how to do that, what it is and how it works. And frankly, business was just something that happened as a byproduct. It's the way it should be. So I started off in this industry, helping people and helping educate them on how they can actually prosper and how they can be better off in themselves financially. Obviously, there's a reward in that process, but it's not what I ever started in the industry as, and it's certainly not what I ever chased. But now I can finally be in that space and be passionate again about what it is that I love doing. That just turned on. I didn't try to make that turn on, and I just knew it was time. So I started discussions and went down that process, and everybody else was in exactly the same space. And sure enough, here we are, and it's just one thing leading to another, and it's getting bigger than Ben Hur faster than I can say g'day, Graham.
I know it's a pretty exciting journey, Phil. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the progress that you made in the last year, when you've been in the flow and in this kind of effortless way of being?
When you say progress, do you mean professionally or just across the board?
I'm thinking professionally now, because I know that you've made huge progress in the business world, which has been a real turnaround from where you were like 2 years ago when you had to walk away from that partnership.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is that what you learned from that process previously, and now that you're in the flow, what's actually transpired in the business world since then?
Okay. All right. I'm working with a real estate network here in Perth. Very forward-thinking real estate network. It kind of all goes back to when I left that previous company. I was in a pretty bad way, and I wasn't really relying on my ability to think at that point, because I'd probably come within a whisker of probably driving myself into the ground and having a bit of a meltdown. I've got a fantastic support crew around me, so they were really really good at helping me to move through that, but it definitely damaged it. And what I ended up coming back to was just instinctive reactions, which at the time I thought was just, do whatever you need to do to make it happen. But in hindsight now, I think the heart was really really doing an amazing thing for me. I ended up going out looking for other jobs, and I looked at it as a bit of a parachute. I needed to move into another position that would allow me a bit of spare time to start putting my life back together, so to speak. So instead of doing all of the aspects to do with investment, I thought I'd focus on finance for a while, which is a great occupation, but it's not like juggling every other one of the processes. So I went, I'm going to do one thing, and I'm going to do it very well, and I'm going to enjoy that. I ended up joining the company that I'm now with, and without even realizing it, there was a whole other aspect that was very exciting that we can tack in, and that is they've got settlements, they've got a real estate network of a number of top-flying real estate agencies in Perth. And when I was in the interview, they asked me about my background, and I'd given them a bit of insight. And we straight away, the CEO picked up on it straight away. He went, look, there's probably a lot of space we can talk about that stuff in the future. And I can distinctly remember almost feeling like I've been slapped in the face with that. It's almost like my life had just followed me into this new job, and I went, well, yeah, but let's just talk about finance for the moment. I don't really want to look at that. But the instinct that actually led me to the place where this amazing synergy was going to exist. And really what we're actually in the process of doing now, I've got a joint venture arrangement with them. It's about 12 to 13 months in the making. We just launched this month. It's about understanding the difference between a typical investment model where you're talking about how to structure an investment property, how to use the cash flow to reduce debt, and the other avenue, which is real estate agents looking at their owner occupied properties, doing a little bit of investment stuff, but not really allowed to give advice around that model. In the middle of those two, there's basically a no man's land where there's people that deal with real estate agents because they know that that's what you do when you buy a property, kind of want advice in investment, but they can't get it from there, and so they end up frustrated, or they end up buying something that might not be in their best interests. Real estate agents can't do anything about that. ASIC won't let them. And then on the other avenue, you've got the typical investment model where, well, typically they just cold call people and try to actually work through that process of trust in order to finally get to a point where they're actually going to do business. That's horrendously expensive. It's very hard work because who the heck likes being cold called? And obviously that process is frankly a dying breed, and a lot of the companies out there have found it really difficult to adjust. My world's been trying to bridge those two, and it's taken a fairly long time, but we've kind of got a model now we're about to go to market, which we've already had huge success in. Every company I've spoken to so far has said yes. And that's a really cool middle ground to actually explore. And we're just in the process now of starting that up with a couple of the companies. We don't want to get too big too quick. And that's where I am. So it's all my history coupled with the history of this company that I'm working with. It's been around over 13 years, and then making that little process work together. Been really good fun.
Yeah, it's an exciting story, Phil. You know, you're bridging the gap between a real estate agent and finance. That's the way I understand it, and bringing those two together. We've both been working at a similar thing without knowing it, because I'm the same. I'm bridging the gap between where people are now and where they know they should be, and then bridging that gap. So it's one and the same thing, really.
It's good fun, isn't it? Because you've got to innovate. You've got to recognise what does and what doesn't work in the current system, and then obviously the process of doing all of that, you've then got to actually present in a palatable way that people can understand, that doesn't threaten people, and then you've obviously got to have the trust between the parties at the different levels as well. And frankly, if it was me of old, I quote Brash, Phil, that you've mentioned, I wouldn't have got a look in, because I was trying so hard to put that into place, and it was literally that trying. And I was getting, as I say, results within my own little world, but you're not going to get trust from third parties, especially in an area where you're innovating, unless you're grounded, unless you're in yourself, unless you're being driven by your heart. That's such an infectious energy. People want to be around that, and they can see that it's constructive and that it actually creates things that'll last. And again, I mean, I'm incredibly grateful that I A, questioned what was going on, and B, that there was someone that spent as much time developing systems and processes that I could just slot into, such as George Halou. It really changed the process for me, and instead of being a 4, 5, 6 year journey, it was like a 3-month journey. and it's been beautiful. I really have. I have loved that. And doing business the other way around, rather than I'm really trying hard and I'm going to make everyone believe what I've got to say. To walk into a room and just speak, be honest, and have integrity, and to just literally speak what's on my heart and have people respond to that. It kind of feels a little too easy, but it's the way it always should have been in the first place.
I often say that to feel connected to yourself is a lot easier than we often make it seem to be. And I think you've proved that, Phil.
Thanks, Graham.
Phil,
yeah,
this has been a really exciting conversation, and I wonder if you could just leave, maybe if something comes to mind that you could leave with the folks out there that will help them to enter into the flow. So that can be either from your music background, or what you've learned in business, or what you've learned personally on the journey.
Yeah, look, my initial reaction to that is trust that after you let go of controlling things in your mind, that the other method will work. Don't let it break down before you actually realize that it has to be another way. The system, which is, cause and effect within your brain and trying to control the world around you and getting what you want, it works, but only to a degree. It doesn't give you satisfaction in that, and the system breaks. You will run out of energy. You can't create more impact on the world around you than you actually have as a limited energy flow. Now, to be in the flow from a heart perspective, you don't have to expend that energy, and it works. I mean, I'm testament to that. It works a lot better than trying to actually control the space around you. But instead of allowing that to all fall apart, give it a crack. There is another way out there that works very well, and that is just following your heart. It seems overly simplistic when you break it down from a rational perspective, but it's not, because if you really think about it, you've probably already known it before someone's even explained it to you, and it's worth actually trying it out, worth giving it a bit of exploration.
I think acceptance of what is true for you is a common theme through all these interviews that I'm doing, Phil. So yours is just another testimony to that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Absolutely.
So Phil, this has been a great time together. It's so exciting to see you propelling ahead now in your business after what you've gone through. And I'd just like to thank everybody for joining the Be Empowered Show. I'm your host, Graham Hopkins. Before we go, I'd like to ask our audience for a big favour, and that is to go to iTunes and leave a review on iTunes itself, because that's the way it'll propel this show up the ratings charts, allow us to speak about this important message to a much greater audience. So if you want to hear any more about the concepts that Phil and I have been talking about today, you may like to go to Amazon and download my book called The Manifesto of Your Inspirational Mind. And I think from today's discussion you'll start to learn what the inspirational mind is, because that is basically what Phil Bertram has been tapping into for the last year. Or you can go to my website, which is www.beempoweredgroup.com, and download my free ebook there called Know Your True Value and Worth. So Phil, thank you so much for being with us today. I've really enjoyed it. Is there something, a last word that you would like to say before we go?
Been a lot of words said already. I really appreciate what you're doing, Graham, and getting the name out there and the word out there. Look, thanks very much for having me on the show. And look, I hope that what we've spoken about can help people to make that journey.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil. So on behalf of Phil Bertram, myself, your host, Graham Hopkins, we both wish you a wonderful future of freedom, peace, and abundance. Remember, change your energy, transform your life. Thank you very much. Well done, Phil.